Thought we were all set. Still can't hear me? I can hear me. Okay, now we should be able to hear me though. Oh, too. Yes, that's your song. And I think this was the problem on that one. I had it stuck.
other than God the Father, none other than the Creator of all things that are seen and unseen, none other than the Creator of heaven and earth and of space. See, we think of creation as being this little marble that floats around in the expanse of heaven, right? Well, it is. But God created the expanse. First and foremost, He humbled His throne and calls them by name. He made the constellations and we think we called it the Big Dipper. Why do we think that? Because God said, think it. And we did. Because that's how God is. God has the ability to interject into our mind whatever He wants to interject in our mind. I depend on God every single day of my life. I am a problem solver. Gary and Laura, when they were here, gave me a t-shirt that says, I fix stuff and I know things. Okay? Now, here's the thing. I can only fix stuff when God tells me how to fix stuff. Now, I know it's God because I can sit here awake and at my peak of thoughtfulness and at my peak of ingenuity, and I can't come up with a single answer on how to fix the thing. But I can take a nap and know exactly how to fix it when I'm done, and I can walk out into my shop, or walk out into the school, or walk in here into the church, and I can fix it. Because God said, this is it, do it. And so I do, and it does. And you know what? I cannot tell you the number of times that this is the fix. I take it apart, I examine it, I can see nothing wrong with it, so I fixed it. And I put it back together, and it works. And I'll bet this has happened to me thousands of times in my life. So much so that I just say, all I have to do is touch it, and it works. Now, I don't understand that other than I know that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me when it comes to fixing things and knowing stuff. And I know stuff. People ask me questions that are way outside of my education and way outside of my knowledge base, which, believe me, you have to go a long way to get something outside of my knowledge base, because in my 70 years, I've experienced way too much for one man to have experienced. And yet I get questions every day outside of that base. But God gives me the answers. He lets me know stuff. Why? Because I let Him let me know stuff. I don't try to supersede my God with my knowledge, because, frankly, I know how little I know. And I know how much I know is so often shaded by and controlled by my fears and my lust and my anger. And I have a lot of those, okay? I am not unlike anybody in those three categories. I have fear, I have lust, and I have anger. And if I don't watch out, one of those three, or a combination, even all of those three, come spewing out of my face and make me look like the idiot everybody really understands that I am. But from time to time, like on Sunday morning and Wednesday evening, and when somebody asks me a real question, the Lord speaks through me, and I look like I know stuff. Just like I can touch things and they're fixed. Okay? Twice now, this camera has stopped working. In both instances, I fixed it. And in both instances, I have no idea what I did to make it work again, because exactly what I tried 2, 3, 6 weeks ahead of time was the same thing that I did this time, and this time it fixed. Because God said, be fixed. And you see, this is what was going on in Jesus' life at this time. And I am not saying that I am like Jesus, other than I follow him, I've studied him, I love him, I'm devoted to him, and I try to be like him. And so, trying to be like him, I try to do the things that he does. And so he closed the book and he gave it back to the attendant and he sat down and he said, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. You heard what I read, and I am the fulfillment of that. I have come to preach the gospel to the poor. I have come to proclaim release to the captives. Now, who are the captives in this scenario? Everybody that believes in the Hebrew religion. Okay? Jesus was sent to preach the gospel and release to the captives of those who were being held captive by the Jewish religion. Okay? By the 603 laws that were so confining. By the absolutes that the rabbis and the Sanhedrin have built up out of their own minds and made into this religion. And Jesus came to set the captives free, those who are bound by this, who are so bound by that religion that they could not love one another. There were criticisms about the fact that they would take the homes, the church, the priests, the Sanhedrin would take the homes of the widows and put them out because the church needed. They would take your money and leave you short on the money side because the church needed. And what happened was these priests, these rabbis became very, very wealthy on the money they collected from others. They even stole the homes of the widows. And then they banded them together, and there was such a group of them that when Jesus formed the new church, they actually had to get 7 of the best men in the community to run the support for those widows. To manage the home that had fallen in such disrepair that they had them live in, and to make sure that they were all getting enough food to eat. And Stephen was in charge of that. And it was such a hated situation that the Sanhedrin charged Stephen with subversion and stoned him to death in the public square. This is what Jesus came to set the captives free from. He said he came to give recovery of sight to the blind. Now, who were the blind? The blind were these same captives who have been lied to, who have been shown an improper world and made to live in it. and Jesus came to give them sight, to see that through Jesus there was grace and mercy and recovery of sight, to see a real world under God, a real situation in God. And he came to deliver that. And not only that, to get those who are, to set free those who are oppressed. And who was doing the oppressing? Now, the Jews, the Sanhedrin, was saying that Rome was the oppressor. Here's the fact of the matter, okay? Rome had put governors in charge of Jerusalem, in charge of Judea, where the Israelites lived, and said, you are free to worship your God. You are free to live your life under your God as long as you pay your taxes and as long as you don't have riots. But there were so many contrary opinions about how to worship that God that the churches were always rioting against each other and fighting and complaining, which we don't hear very much about at all, but it was always going on. Okay, just like if you've ever been to a Southern Baptist convention where there were 36,000 individual independent churches under that convention. Now that convention lived for nearly 200 years. And as long as the convention's focus was this item, and that was sending missionaries. That was what the Southern Baptist Convention formed about, okay? They got together once a month in the public square, all of the churches, and they brought their 10% to give to the Southern Baptist Convention so they could send Jeff and they could send Dan and Bev to Africa because they wanted them out of the country because they were too Christian, and they sent them to Africa so they could be free of their liberal Christian lives. No, I'm teasing. Not that much. But all they did was send missionaries at the beginning. But then the WMU, the Women's Missionary Union, decided, this was a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, they decided that they need to reach the kids better, so they started the Sunday School Board. And their job in Nashville, Tennessee, was to print and publish Sunday school information that would create in a weekly, lesson how to make pure, devoted Southern Baptist Christians. And it began just like the 603 laws that the Jews produced, which caused Jesus to come and set those captives free. It's the same thing. Now they had to get free from this Southern Baptist Convention. And how did God do that? Well, he destroyed the convention. He let the convention leaders steal money, make illegal loans. I mean, he destroyed it with greed and lust. The same way he destroyed and broke down the Catholic Church. The Christian and Missionary Alliance Church was developed in the 20s and 30s by a single pastor, and he got together with some other pastors that were from other denominations, but they wanted to send out pure gospel teachers to foreign lands, so they made the Christian and Missionary Alliance. It wasn't a church, it was just an alliance of like-minded people who wanted to promote missionary adventures. But over the years, it became a church under this man's preaching and became a denomination. And like everything else that becomes man-controlled and man-driven, it got perverted and it's falling apart. Just like everything else that man does on this earth, because man has the basic problem of man. Man thinks, I am good, and in my goodness, I am personally able to lead. Okay? And so that means that if I believe that I am good and I am personally able to lead, then by the same thought pattern, you are good and you are personally able to lead. And of course, if you are good and I am good and we need leadership, what we'll do is we'll take the best of us. And what is the best of us in our measurement ability? Those who are the most profitable, the most loyal to our businesses, and we'll put them together and we'll make them a leadership board. We'll call them elders of the church or a board of directors of the church, and we'll let them lead. And the rest of us will follow them because that's what we're trained to do. But the problem is, no one is good. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And just because you put 10, 12 good men who are successful in their businesses and act like in public that they're good Christian people, that they can lead the church, what you end up with is a board of lost people, blind people, leading blind people to go into holes. Because that's what it says in the Bible, blind people do. They fall in pits. And that's what happens. So Jesus came, and his purpose was to set us free, to allow us to see, to make us visionaries, to give us a vision. And how does he do that? He does that if we surrender to him. He puts his spirit upon us, into us, and he opens our eyes like he did to Saul on that road to make him Paul, and take the scales from his eyes, and allows us to see through God's eyes what God sees. And what does God see? Why did God send his son to die on a cross on this earth? Because of what he sees. And what he sees is that man is lost and cannot find his way because he is blind, because he is oppressed, because he is misled, because he is lied to and believes the lies. And so he sent his son to tell the truth. And what is the truth? The truth is we are all sinners. And we all need to be saved. And what does salvation look like? Salvation looks like if we believe in God's Son, Jesus Christ, to the point where we will follow him. I mean, that's a belief. That's faith. Okay, I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe that he came to preach the gospel. I agree that he came to set me free from this religious oppression, this government oppression, this worldly oppression, which is Satan. Remember, Satan gets into the church and causes the oppression. He gets into the government and causes the oppression. He gets into society and causes the oppression. How many times have you heard since the fires in California that they're just going to move to Arizona, especially Congress, and buy these new houses they're building, and they're going to change our society? You've heard that, right? You know that's what's going on, right? Am I lying to you? Huh? You haven't heard it? Okay. I have a lot, but okay, so they're not. But you see, Satan wants to destroy us. Not only does he want to destroy us as a nation of God-fearing people, which I believe he is doing very well at. Since a couple of presidents ago, we had a president that said, we are no longer a Christian nation, a God-fearing nation, and I have seen much evidence of that going on since that was said, okay, and that is the devil, Satan, trying to lead us away from God. And I have seen the product of Satan in the churches, all of the churches, leading people away from Jesus and leaving the churches unable to gather respect because the leadership has fallen, and unable to keep its membership because the word that's being preached is no longer pure, and the way of the church has become like the way of the world. And so we've got these inherent problems caused by the fact that we believe that man is good and will make good decisions. And Jesus said that just ain't so. That's why he came and portrayed a perfect life so that we would have a model to look at and say, how therefore shall I live? Okay, and so we look at Jesus and see how he lived and what he did. And all were speaking well of him, of Jesus, this is verse 22, and wondering at the gracious words which were falling from his lips. And they were saying, is this not Joseph's son? So here are the people of Nazareth seeing this Jesus that grew up in town. Now imagine a boy that grew up in Congress, okay? And when he reaches the age of 33, he comes into town after he'd been out of town for a couple months, and he comes back into town and he says, I'm the Son of God. The scriptures have been fulfilled through me. And he speaks with authority, and people marvel at what he's saying. But then the devil says, but isn't this Joseph's son? And isn't Joseph just a carpenter? A great Jewish carpenter, but just a carpenter. He's a rabbi that's never been to school. You know, when I surrendered to full-time gospel ministry in my church of thousands down in Phoenix, and I knew I was going to be a pastor of a large church because I'm a big ego kid. And I was 30 when this happened, okay? Significant. So I'm 30 when this happened, and I go to the pastor and I said, Pastor Jackson, I have surrendered to full-time gospel ministry. and he hugged me, and he appreciated me. And then he said, the surrender to ministry is the surrender to education. You have to go get your seminary degree. So what I knew about seminary was it was school, a 4-year program, 3-year program, excuse me, for young men or old men and women who had a bachelor's degree, which I had none. Okay? I opted out of college to earn a good living back when I was just out of high school. So now I'm 30 and I have no prior education. So I go in and I roll at Grand Canyon College. Now it's Grand Canyon University, but I go and enroll there. And then the next Sunday, I'm meeting in the church because I was a teacher of Sunday school. I'm meeting there with the director of singles ministry, Steve Seelig, and we're talking about this because he and Pastor Jackson had talked about it. And he said, did you know? Be careful when somebody asks you, did you know? Did you know that you can go to seminary as an associate's degree student, which means you will take the entire master's curriculum except for Greek and Hebrew? You don't have to learn the languages, but all of the other education that a master's student gets, you will get, and then you will graduate with an associate's degree, and it won't be, it'll be well accepted with all of the churches. Well, I believed it, and it wasn't true. Frankly, after 15 years of working in the churches full time to become a pastor, the only church that ever called me to be a pastor were the 8 people who were Congress Community Church. 8 people, not even 8 families, 8 individuals, okay? And all 8 of them couldn't even agree to call me. So one of them quit the church so that it could be unanimous. And they called me to lead the church. That was 24 years ago, and I'm still here. And I know you may not appreciate that as much as I do, but I really do. And this is how God does his work. It's how he did it with Jesus, and he calls people like me and you who believe in Jesus Christ to the point that it changes our lives, and we want to do what he does. And so it says, is this not Joseph's son? And they said, yeah. And it says, and Jesus says to them, no doubt you will quote this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself. Whatever we heard was done at Capernaum, do here in your hometown as well. So what they're saying is, we heard that you came into Capernaum, this town not too far away, and you healed the blind, you healed the lepers, you made the lame walk, everybody who was brought to you, you took care of, and you made them feel good. Okay? And we want you to do that here. And he said, truly I say to you, no prophet is welcome in his hometown. But I say to you in truth, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, when a great famine came over the land, and yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a widow, to a woman who was a widow. And yet Elijah And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman in Syria. So what is he saying? He says, you have written or read the scriptures, both of Elijah and Elisha, and those were very well-known scriptures, okay? All of the Jews knew that Elijah never died and was taken up to heaven and was replaced by Elisha, and they were great prophets, and yet here's the story of both of them. Elijah was not able in Israel to help anyone, to save anyone. And he had to go clear to Sidon, a town of great sin. No church influence in Sidon was going on at this time. And he went to this widow and he asked her. Now, we think of widows as 70, 80-year-old women, okay? Now, this widow had a young boy as a child. She was probably no more than in her 20s. Okay? So he goes to this young widow who is living by herself in her 20s. She's down to her last cup of flour and her last quarter cup of oil, just enough to make some biscuits for them to eat. And she says, I can't help you. I'm going to go home and bake. I'm gathering these sticks and I'm going to go home and bake some cakes so that my son and I may eat them and die. And Elijah says to her, I tell you what, let me make you a deal. You go home and make one little cake for me. You know, take 2 teaspoons of your flour and 4 drops of your oil and mix it together and use a couple of these sticks and bake me a cracker. And if you will do this, I will guarantee you that your flour will not run out and your oil will not be used up until the rains come and you can restore your kitchen. And she did this, and he did this, yet she was the only one saved. And a similar thing happened to Elisha and Naaman. And what Jesus is telling these people in Nazareth, I can't do anything for you here because your faith in God is so weak that you won't let him work. You won't let God be God in your midst because you are so enamored with your own self-righteousness, self-goodness, and self-leadership that God can't help you. And when he told the people this, they were angry at him, so angry at him that they grabbed a hold of him and took him out to the edge of Jerusalem. And you all know that the 2 edges of Jerusalem have the northern cliffs on them that you see in Ireland. And they were going to throw him over, and it says that he just walked out of their sight. He just left. They had a hold of him and he just walked away because you cannot do anything to Jesus Christ that he does not permit you to do. Okay? You can't make him save you. And you cannot kill him unless he permits you to do it. And he did that once, and he ain't going to do it again. What he says the next time he comes, he's going to kill everybody here. So get your act together so I can take you out of this place before I burn it up. And that's what he says. And that's what he's here for. Now, what is he here for? Is he here to heal people? No. Is he here to cast out demons? No. What he came for was to preach the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And what that means is you have to believe in that. And if you need miracles to believe in that, that's not going to do you any good. Remember, he said to Thomas, you believe because you saw. But blessed are those who believe because they heard. We live by every word that comes out of the mouth of God, not by every miracle that is given across the earth. Miracles aren't meant to save. Miracles are meant to display that God is all-powerful and that there is a God. But miracles aren't meant to save. Speaking in tongues isn't meant to save people. The gospel of Jesus Christ saves people, not any fancy language that is other earthly, okay? We have no idea what that means. We want to think that it's a power bigger than us, and it is. Be careful of powers bigger than you. There's one thing and one thing only that saves human beings from sin, and the wages of sin is death, and you suffer death in hell. One thing that saves you from that, and that is the good news that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who was born of a virgin, who grew up, who did 3 years of ministry, testifying, giving evidence that there is a God. Okay? Indisputable evidence. If you read all the way back through the Old Testament, what you see, indisputable evidence that there is a God. You know, when they put the bulls on the altar, and these godless people called on their godless entities to start the bulls on fire, and they wouldn't catch on fire. And then the bulls that God's man, he dumped water all over this stuff for a whole day. And then he prayed, and God set it on fire, all soaking wet. He even put a ditch around it so the water didn't flow away, because he didn't want anybody thinking that it wasn't God. Indisputable evidence that there was God. Yet men, in their wisdom and in their understanding, argue against God until they die and go to hell. They argue for crazy things like evolution and Big Bang Theory. Things that it would take a almost mindless person to think these things were real and true. And yet, the government of the state of Arizona in 1996 declared that evolution was true. It was a fact. Not created by any evidence, only created by an act of the government, which made it illegal for a public school, any school actually, to teach creation. Now, how crazy is that? But that is the world we live in, and that is the world that God sent his Son to save. And the way he was sent to save it was to preach the gospel to the poor. And who are the poor? The poor are those who don't have the wealth of the understanding and love of God. If you don't have God, if you don't know God, if you don't have his Son Jesus Christ, you're as poor as they come. And he sent him to proclaim release to the captives, to set the captives free, he said, and to preach the recovery of sight to the blind by telling them the truth. The way, the truth, and the life. I am the light of the world. Jesus Christ is the truth. He's not a portion of the truth. There is no truth without him. Any truth that does not have Jesus in it is a lie. And you need to know that. You need to own that, because someday it could be a question set before you that you will have to choose life and death over. Does anybody remember the Columbine school shooting? Does anybody remember the story about the teenage girl who stood before the shooter? And he said, "Are you a Christian?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And he killed her right there. Do you have that kind of faith? I sat with Ray last week, and he said, "I am ready to go home. I am ready to leave this world." Yesterday, he was given less than a week to live. And he is ready because he knows the truth. He knows Jesus Christ. And he knows that when he wakes up that next day, even that evening, he will be in paradise with Jesus. He will not be suffering anymore. And he knows that soon, and very soon, Norma will be with him. And he knows that his previous wife, who knew the Lord, will be with him. And he knows that we will join him there too, because we love the Lord. And that's what the Lord promises all of us. So I am very, very sad, and I am mourning my brother, my best friend, Ray Brown. But I am truly excited and happy for him and for me. Because the only way I can be happy for him is to know that he knows what I know, and what we know is true. And therefore, we can be happy. And so can you. Pray with me now. Father God, we thank you for sending your Son, Jesus Christ, full of the Spirit, anointed to preach the gospel to the poor, sent to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and freedom to those who are oppressed. We proclaim, I proclaim, this is a favorable year of the Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.